because it seems to me that at the moment, that openness, and I feel it goes beyond a belief. It actually is really important when we have direct experiences of this,
Yeah.
because direct experiences, as we both know, are so much more impactful than either reading about these in a book or even someone else telling us about their own experiences. Although that's fabulous, because I think the more we share our own experiences, then the more we can sort of invite others to share their experiences. And in a lifetime of those sort of experiences, it's been a privilege and a joy, and it's enriched my life immeasurably to be able to have these communications with other realms of existence and knowledge and wisdom. And I would say love. And I'm not saying that every being on every plane is necessarily loving, but in my own experience, the vast majority are. And what they're doing, and certainly, again, coming back to my own experience, they're really encouraging us to wake up.
Welcome to Connecting with Coincidence. I am your host, Bernie Beitman, MD. I'm a psychiatrist. I study meaningful coincidences, and sometimes I get to be in the little small things that are happening right in front of my nose. Sometimes I get to be out there, way out in outer space. And today I'm going to go with you, or you're going to go with me into cosmology and how cosmology interacts with what we are doing right here. Uh, our guest is Jude Currivan, who is such a delightful woman, as you will see and may have seen from a previous podcast that she and I have been on before. She's a remarkable woman, doing all kinds of things in the world that many of us are not. And it's so delightful to be able to speak with her about the things that she is doing. And that's what we will be doing today. Uh, so, Jude, I'm going to do a little intro about you, and then we're going to get into some coincidence story, which we're just going to see what happens from you, which is really, you're a kind of spontaneous kind of person, and this is what we're going to come up with. I'll ask you a coincidence story, but first, let me introduce this amazing mind that's hiding behind that beautiful smile. Dr. Jude Currivan is a cosmologist, planetary healer, and she's only talking about one planet here, in case you didn't know, the one we got right here. She's a futurist, author, and co-founder of Whole World View. You can connect with her in her bio on that website. Previously, one of the most senior business women in UK. What's she doing talking about cosmology? She has a master's degree in physics from Oxford. You've heard of that, specializing in quantum physics and cosmology. They come together, the little and the big. A PhD in archaeology, oh, why not? From the University of Reading, researching ancient cosmologies. Get it? Let's see how those other guys thought about it before we got here. A long life researcher into my favorite question: what is the nature of reality? What is the nature of reality? Nature and reality. She integrates leading edge science, consciousness research, and universal wisdom, teaching into a holistic worldview. She's traveled to 80 countries, worked with wisdom keepers from many traditions, and globally serving conscious evolution and transformational change. Conscious evolution, transformational change. And for some reason, she's given up books, but writing books, but there's a reason for that. She's doing movies now. I mean, when you got a mind like that, you just keep doing stuff, and that's what she is doing. So, welcome to the show, Jude. Again,
It's so lovely to be with you, Bernie. And I love why before we came on air, you said, out there, out there. And I said, no, no, no. This is about bringing the vastness of the cosmos here, here and now, and very intimate. So I'm so looking forward to our adventure again today.
for our adventure again. So, why don't you tell me a coincidence story, Jude?
I'd love to. One happened a few weeks ago. I was sitting in my kitchen having a cup of tea, as I'm a Brit, as
A
Probably
cup
everybody's
of
guessed by
tea, a
now.
cup of
Cup of
tea, yes.
tea,
Yeah.
as and looking out my kitchen window, and that was December, early December, and quite a cold morning, and there was a butterfly in the garden, a few feet beyond the kitchen window, and it just hovered for a little bit, just to make sure it got my attention, and then it flew away, and it flew off and over the hedge and away, and it was a bright yellow, gorgeous yellow colour that's called a brimstone. And I heard very soon afterwards that my dear friend, evolutionary biologist Elizabeth Sartoris, had passed over. And the obituary spoke about her love of butterflies and how, she loved them. She loved the metamorphosis of caterpillars to butterflies and all other things. And I suddenly realized that synchronicity was Elizabeth saying to me, before I knew she'd passed, I did not know she'd passed, that her presence. And a brimstone, she lived in Hawaii. She lived in this gorgeous volcanic island. I mean, what a perfect butterfly to show me that it was her saying hello and I'm fine. And she was such a wonderful soul sister to me. It was just such a beautiful moment to appreciate her and that synchronicity of her continuing presence in my perspective.
Well, as you know, these called sometimes crisis apparitions when an actual being seems to show up. But there's a lot of correlations between people who are dying and or have died or in the process and
Absolutely.
people who love them. And it's a it's getting to be a kind of common human experience. Like I was choking uncontrollably 3,000 miles away. My father was dying, bleeding into his blood, bleeding into his throat, dying. And that's a version of the shared death experience, which this these are various variations on. But I'm struck by the brimstone because, as you know, fire and brimstone go together.
Exactly. It was a perfect butterfly to represent the volcanic land that she loved. And also the butterfly is about, in a way, being free, this metamorphosis to freedom. And I know that she, in her last days, was at peace and she was ready to transition, to pass over. So the peace of that, the beauty of that, and then the sort of the image of the butterfly flying free was so perfect. And as I say, I hadn't known at that time that she had passed.
And the butterfly is often a symbol of the soul,
Absolutely.
and
Absolutely.
that's going off. It's we just had a member of our board of the Coincidence Project died in a car accident, and we're all mourning the loss of him. Um,
Mm.
and I had a dream when I found out about it of being crushed, my chest being crushed, and I thought, well, oh, that's how Chris died. Um, I don't know how he actually died, but a car accident, steering wheel is really a possible way of
Mm.
experiencing that. We are much more connected with each other than we want to admit.
I'm happy to admit it,
Yeah.
as you well know. But I think a lot of people are not, and yet it's these sort of circumstances and experiences that, if we're willing to pay attention to them, I think Bernie is so powerful in showing that we are absolutely inseparable, from each other and the whole world. And it seems to me that this is a time when us waking up to remember that is absolutely vital for our future, as
It's
well as our
vital.
present.
It's vital to our future. Now, I'd like to ask you, as a part of what's vital to our future, is how you are bringing the cosmos, the vastness of that Big Bang, and all the details you've described in your books about what happened afterwards, so that we showed up right here with our little consciousness and all those Goldilocks numbers that seem to make it possible for us to be living here. My favorite thing is chlorophyll. I mean, I don't know how that happened, but they got ideas. But little one cell things decided to have a
Yes.
little chlorophyll going on. It's still a mystery that's a wonder among many other mysteries that allow us to be here. So how are you thinking about doing, and with your movies as well as your books, of bringing the cosmos here to us, to hear about it, to feel about it here on Earth?
Everything I can do, because the moment I said we're inseparable from each other and the whole world, I literally meant our entire universe. And although we are very fortunate to live in our beautifully planetary home, we would not be here if nearly 14 billion years ago, our universe hadn't begun, not in a chaos, the implied chaos of a Big Bang, because we know it wasn't chaotic. It was extraordinarily fine-tuned, exquisitely ordered first moment of space and time. The first moment of what I call rather a Big Bang. We know it wasn't big, but it wasn't a bang. The first moment of an ongoing big breath. So ever since, as space has expanded ever since, as time has flowed forward ever since from past to present and unfolding into the future, that has been a story of a universe that meaningfully exists and purposefully evolves from simplicity to complexity. So I talk about the first moment of an ongoing big breath. And our universe is vast, but its big breath literally, I don't mean this as a metaphor, literally breathes through our little breaths in every moment. When we go back to the beginning of our universe, all those billions of years ago, in its simplest state of hydrogen and helium, the hydrogen in our bodies, the hydrogen in the waters of our bodies and our planetary home, and far beyond our planetary home, is as old as the universe, just a few moments younger than the entire universe. And the rest was created as the rest of we were created in stars hundreds of millions of years later to that, billions of years ago. There is so much incredible, as you say, wonder and mystery and beauty. But when we realize our universe meaningfully exists and purposefully evolves, not as a great thing, but that fundamentally it is the nature of reality is consciousness, is universal consciousness, expressing itself as a universe, expressing itself in its wholeness, in every tiny constituent parts of which we are microcosms. So the universe learns in its wholeness through the in essence the cells of its body. So it learns through its elements, and it learns through its stars, and it learns through its galaxies, and it learns through its planets, and it learns through its plants, and it learns through its people. Every aspect of our universe is part of that learning process of its entirety. It's part of its learning, its exploration, its adventure, its evolutionary adventure, its experience itself as a cosmic thought, as a beautiful finite thought form in the infinity and the eternity of the cosmos. So it is vast and yet it is intimate, because our every thought, our every emotion, our every choice, our every action is part of that evolutionary journey and adventure.
As I listen to you, it's almost as if you're speaking for the universe, that the universe, the mind of the universe, as I feel it actually, as well as hear it, is flowing through you at this moment.
That's very kind. That's really kind. And if it is, and I hope it is, but it's flowing through all of us at every moment, it's an invitation to us all to remember who we really are. And, that is really at the heart of all that I do, to serve that remembering and to serve that wholeness of who we are and the potential of what we can evolve to be, because we have attributes. You are such a maestro, credible, maestro in delving into the deeper nature of reality and bringing back these wonderful understanding for the benefit of all of us. And synchronicities is one of those incredible gifts of a universe, because synchronicities don't violate the causation within space-time. But what they do is they can only occur given that our universe exists as a whole being, as a unitive entity, where we can go beyond the apparent limitations of space and time. Then we can go beyond the cosmic speed cop within space time, the signaling limit of the speed of light, to access the experiences, to access the insights and the wisdom. This is who we are. And this is, I feel, the invitation of the universe, not just to remember, but then to say, this is the threshold of what is potentially the greatest adventure we've ever undertaken as human beings.
Just because I am able to tune in to people, listen to them, and just like get into where they are, sometimes I lose my objectivity, I'm told, and just get into what the person is doing. But most of the time I can step back out again. And I've been just listening to you, and particularly the last part of what you're talking about, but even before. And when I say that you are speaking for the universe, your mind is much wider open than most people I talk with. And I'm sorry to tell you about yourself in this way, um, but that's what I do. In a lot of different ways, I can do that. And I trust my intuitive read of things, and I'm just saying what I see. And it's like there's so much more wideness, breadth. In your mind as you talk, and I'm climbing up the words you're saying into your mind and feeling the heart in it as well as the thoughts in it. And it's very expansive. And part of what your mission is, whether, and I think you kind of know this, but I'll say it, is to be able to have people tune in to how you tune in to how the universe experiences itself. You're like, hey, I'm representing this thing out there, so, and we're part of it because it's not out there, but I'm in it, but it's here and it's out there, it's everywhere, it's everywhere. We can go and do that thing, but I'm talking about your mind as a kind of as an expression of something much broader than most of us are able to experience. So you're not only just talking words and movies, but you're an exemplar. You're an exemplar through interaction of this experience. What do you think of that?
I wholeheartedly appreciate your kindness, and that is without sort of putting myself in any place of specialness, because I'm not special at all. What I would feel is that this is our lineage, this is our heritage, all of us, all of us. It's just that perhaps I am more open to this
Yeah.
because I've experienced this since I was 4 years old. So this whole journey of mine has been, more and more consciously in service to being a sort of an open channel for the universe.
Now that's clearer. It started when you were 4. You didn't make this up, and you got it. Uh, and and when I was like 3, my mother walked into my room, or 4, and she sees me looking at the ceiling, and she thinks I'm depressed. I was watching my own thoughts, is what I was doing. It was really pretty interesting, and I kind of keep doing that. I mean, it's kind of like we
Yeah.
come out like certain ways, and you started off this way. So when you say there's nothing special about you, yeah, you're just the rest of us. But one of the key ideas that I'm trying to bring out in the next book I'm writing, which I call the psychotherapy for the collective human organism. We're trying to be able to help the collective human organism evolve itself by becoming more aware of itself, by becoming more actively involved with its collective self-observer. What I'm trying to do with that is have us recognize, among other things, a fundamental principle that you are indirectly touching on. You are nothing special. You're just the rest of us, just like everybody else.
Absolutely.
You're connected to everybody else, but you're also unique. And balancing this uniqueness with the integrativeness, the tendency both for self-assertiveness and integrating with the rest is something that's very difficult for a lot of people to do, but is essential for us to do.
Totally. Totally agree, because sometimes, and you must have come across this yourself, people somehow feel when we talk about the sort of the unitive nature of reality, that everything is interconnected, more than that, interdependent, more than that, ultimately inseparable from that wholeness, that somehow unity is uniformity. It isn't. It's the both and, as you so beautifully state. It's that we're all, none of us are special, all of us are special. We're all part together of this universe, and yet we're unique, each of us. We're differentiated. It's rather like the notes of a cosmic symphony. Yeah, every note is different. We'd notice if one, it's amazing if you really listen to music, how just the loss of one note is really noticeable. And yet we
Oh,
so,
Jude. Oh, Jude.
sorry.
Well, I'm glad to hear it from you.
So absolutely, each of us. So each of us are those notes, those unique notes, and yet we're all part of the same cosmic symphony.
Well, the way I'm doing this, in my little unique way, yeah, the we're not all one. Okay, I'm not doing that note thing. I'm trying to stay away from it. As that note pun, it was a good one. I really you slid that one in. It was quite subtle,
I
but
didn't even know. I had no idea. It so popped out
that's
of my
what made it
mouth, and
so.
I
That's
realized it.
that's what made it so good. That you didn't notice it. You didn't notice it, but you noted it, and then noted. Anyway, we'll forget about that.
We'll move on.
We'll move on. We'll try to get away from that one. That that my proposition is that each of us is a cell in the collective human organism. And that's the unity that I am looking at, and also that this collective human organism is part of nature here on Earth. That we are connected with the trees and Gaia itself, and
Absolutely.
that's why I'm more myopic than you are. I don't get out to the Big Bang yet. I mean, that's what's fun talking with you about it. I don't get out the big breath. I'm not doing that yet, but that's why I want to talk to you about, first of all, synchronicity, and then I'll have the other question about the universe getting to know itself. But I think of synchronicity or meaningful coincidences as clues to how reality works, and I kind of think you're
Totally
think.
agree.
Please expand on what that means to you.
Well, because in the old paradigm of a materialist and separate universe, where a random universe, where the Big Bang was almost like a random and chaotic beginning, where there is no intrinsic meaning or purpose in our universe, where everything's comprised of sort of separate objects. There's no place. There's no place for synchronicities. There's no place for love. There's no real place for consciousness. So everything of that nature, of that those attributes of reality, were just so peripheralized and pushed to the side. And the really important thing is, Bernie, is that although science has moved on way beyond that mechanistic worldview, its methodologies and its overall framing is still materialistic and separatist, because it's focused on the technologies of sort of 20th century science of quantum physics and relativity physics. It's not really dealt with the nature of their clues that they gave us, of what is now coming to a point that we cannot ignore those clues. We cannot ignore the growing evidence that's showing us that our universe does meaningfully, purposefully exist and evolve as a unitive entity. So much so that in 2022, the Nobel Prize for Physics was given to 3 researchers who had researched experimentally the unitive nature of our entire universe. And to that extent, in 2018, a group of them were able to non-locally entangle, as it's called, and I know you use these terms and this language because it's part of the understanding of the work that you do. Photons of light in a laboratory with starlight from 600 light years away, with light from a very active galactic source called a quasar 12.2 billion light years ago. In other words, the light from the quasar left it 12.2 billion years ago. The starlight left the star 600 years ago, and yet they come into the laboratory and they come literally, they form inseparable entities with photons in the laboratory. Now, that was just an experimental proof that our entire universe is non-locally unitive. And so when we understand that, we have a universe that isn't just meaningful and purposeful, that exists in its wholeness, and therefore we have meaning and purpose, but that the deeper nature of reality is this mindful causation that can actually, that is essentially universal consciousness, cosmic consciousness, expressing itself as our universe and everything in it. So just as each of us are cells of our human family, and our human family is an aspect of our entire sentience of our planetary home Gaia, so planetary home Gaia is a sentient being within a sentient universe. And so we can't really stop at ourselves, each of ourselves. We can't really stop at our body. We can't even stop at our planet, because we just have to keep going out, because the whole is inseparable. Now we can choose where to stop. We can choose to sort of say, this is where, I'm going to differentiate myself in a conversation between the two of us. But I know we're differentiating ourselves, but we're not separate. You know that we're differentiating ourselves, but we're not separate from our planetary home. We both know that we're not differentiating our planetary home from the whole universe. So it's only a choice as to where we stop. And at whole world view, we talk about act local, so we can say, I'm really going to focus on my backyard, my garden, my community, my friends, my family. Perfect. We can say, let's go beyond that and feel global. Let's stop at our planetary sentience, our solar family. Or we can say, think cosmic. And I would invite us to do all three. Think cosmic, feel global, act local. Because then we can choose where our heart calls us to serve the good of the whole, if that is indeed our choice to do so. And I know it's your choice.
It's a choice, and that's a key part of all this. But I was asking you about synchronicity and how it's a clue to how reality works. And I'd ask you to be able to tell us a little bit more about how you think that happens.
Happy. First of all, when we have a universe that exists and evolves as a unitive entity, think of a balloon. Okay, when we blow a balloon up, it starts very small, then we put more and more breath into it, rather like the big breath of our universe, only it's us doing it rather than the cosmos doing it. The balloon blows up, okay? It blows up as a whole balloon. It doesn't blow up as little bits of a balloon. It blows up as a whole balloon. So we can consider that the surface of that balloon is a metaphor for the surface, the boundary of our universe. So if you sort of, you've got a balloon to a certain size and you decide to sort of shut it off so it can stay stable, it doesn't grow any bigger, you can feel around it and you can feel around it, but it's whole. So in a sense, it knows itself all the time, all the time. And yet you can argue that within that balloon, if we go back to it being our universe, within that balloon, as time does flow, as space does continue to expand, there is a speed limit to the speed at which signals can pass between you and me, and that's the speed of light. So it's a both and. Within space-time, no signal can go faster than the speed of light. Otherwise, we couldn't have this conversation. There'd be no history going back 14 billion years. There would be no evolutionary progress. I wouldn't be able to begin a thought within space-time and come to the end of it. I wouldn't be able to begin a sentence and come to the end of it. That's within space-time. And yet, because it's the both and of our universe existing and evolving in its wholeness, in its unitive reality, then it can know itself, and circumstances can mean that when your friend or your brother or my friend was passing over, their consciousness and ours were conjoined, because that happens all the time. It's just that we're not aware of it. And often in the experimentation suggests that it's those times of emotional intensity when those synchronicities can have their greatest effect, or the telepathic connections, because that's another phenomenon that isn't explainable by the old paradigm of separation, but is natural in this understanding of wholeness. So whether it be synchronicities, which don't violate any laws of physics or causation within space-time, whether it's telepathic communications, which again don't violate the laws of physics or causality within space-time, nonetheless, they are both and natural attributes of the understanding of our universe that we now have.
What about plants, animals?
They're all part of a sentient planet. And they are, and I wouldn't say just plants and animals. I would say, as you said earlier, the entirety of our planetary home is sentient. It's rather like, you can't have a sentient universe in its wholeness and then just take out bits, because there's no ability to take out bits. Down to atoms, down to the scale, the most minute scale of our universe, which is named after Max Planck, one of the great pioneers of quantum physics, which is where this consciousness is pixelated at the most minute scale. It then gets built up into atoms and on into molecules and on into eventually planets and plants and people. The entirety of its sentience at different levels of self-awareness is embodied within all those scales, from the tiniest to the whole of our universe. So that's why we can communicate with animals, we can communicate with plants, but as indigenous shamans do, and as I've done all my life, I would also say, and I'm not trying to impose this on anyone, but from my own experience, I'm able to do that with our entire planetary home, with rocks and mountains and waters and the air, and way beyond, and different multidimensional levels of engagement. And I'm sure you get folks on your show and other folks on other shows that these sort of direct experiences are the way they live their lives.
When you say multidimensional, does that mean you communicate with your butterfly friend?
Yes, but not just my butterfly friend, because my butterfly friend is also part of the physical realm that you and I are sharing in our human bodies. I'm talking about dimensional levels beyond the incarnate, in other words,
That,
discarnate realms
that's what I
of.
meant. Discarnate, that your friend is, I meant the friend represented by your butterfly
Ah,
is
okay.
I
Yes.
mean, discarnate beings is what
Yes,
I'm
yes.
asking you about. Could you tell us about your experience with discarnate beings?
How long have you got?
Um, we have one more question I got to get to, but you just go for it, and we'll see what we'll do with it.
Okay.
Okay.
Well,
The
well,
important thing for this discussion
yes,
is that discarnate beings are communicatable with.
exactly so.
That's the important. We can list a bunch of them, and I try to for this next book I'm coming up with the different kinds of ones. There's some good
Yeah,
ones as well as some not so good ones hanging around out there, but they're a good part of the whole thing too, and we can do that one too. But the idea that you can communicate with people who have
absolutely.
passed over is very, very important, as well as be able to get to the Akashic record, to be able
Absolutely.
to do that. And it's important for someone with your background for our audience, to be able to believe that it's possible to communicate with discarnate beings. And so that's what this question is.
Yeah, I was teasing you because I appreciated that was your question. And it's a really important question, because it seems to me that at the moment, that openness, and I feel it goes beyond a belief. It actually is really important when we have direct experiences of this,
Yeah.
because direct experiences, as we both know, are so much more impactful than either reading about these in a book or even someone else telling us about their own experiences. Although that's fabulous, because I think the more we share our own experiences, then the more we can sort of invite others to share their experiences. And in a lifetime of those sort of experiences, it's been a privilege and a joy, and it's enriched my life immeasurably to be able to have these communications with other realms of existence and knowledge and wisdom. And I would say love. And I'm not saying that every being on every plane is necessarily loving, but in my own experience, the vast majority are. And what they're doing, and certainly again, coming back to my own experience, they're really encouraging us to wake up, to remember, because there is this perspective that this is our next great leap in conscious in the evolution of our consciousness as individuals and as a planetary species. And it opens up so, I mean, to give an example, Bernie, you say some examples. Different levels of awareness, whether that be ascended masters, or elemental and deviant realms of our planetary home, um, ancestors, ancestral voices have taught me things that when I was doing my PhD in archaeology, I could then go to books and see them validated. But I didn't learn them from the books. I learned them directly from the ancestral voices and then went to look. And yeah, oh, sure enough. Yeah. And there was one example when I was told when I was doing my PhD that around 4.5, 5,000 years ago in England, there had been an invasion from Europe. And that invasion had not just been a sort of new ideas, it had literally meant that the people, the indigenous people in England, the men, it had been they somehow they weren't allowed to propagate. They weren't allowed to have families, and this was so completely radical. And in my archaeology, I was realizing that there was some new ideas at that time, new potteries, new tools, and all the rest of it. But there was nothing to validate what the guidance had told me until 20 years later. And then genetic studies have shown that that indeed did happen. When we look back around 4,500 years ago, we see a dislocate between the male line of the indigenous peoples going up to that point and the male line going forward. And that was only discovered through genetic studies 20 years after I was told this case. So it's those sort of things. And having conversations, as you say, with friends that are passed over. I've had that on numerous occasions too, but many, many, many others.
I'm really most interested in information you get. I mean, I can establish that I was able to connect with the father of a deceased father of a friend of mine and tell her things that I wouldn't have known otherwise. So
Exactly.
that could convince me that I had done that, and as well as it convinced her. So it's information that I'm most interested in.
Absolutely.
It to feel the love sometimes of my father, to feel my mother being around sometimes, one of my best friends from college. These are to feel them is really, really important part of all this. But as part of what I'm doing, and I think what you're doing, is we're trying to expand consciousness, and information is very important in all this to validate that what you get is really happening,
Yeah.
as I could do with the father of this friend of mine. So, can you give us some other examples? That's a great example you have of the men were not allowed to procreate, and then that was validated years later. And
Yeah.
what other information have you been able to get that you've been able to validate?
Yeah. And just to finish that story, the
Yeah.
guidance was not that they were killed, the violently killed. There was something, we still don't know exactly how, but there was something that prevented them being able to procreate. And so there's no evidence of the violence and them being killed. And we're still waiting to sort of discover deeper into what were the cultural reasons, perhaps. But nonetheless, we now know it happened. Another example on a more personal basis is a friend of ours passed over some years ago, and we were invited to his funeral. And the morning of the funeral, I went to the florist in our local town to obtain a wreath or a bouquet of flowers to take with us, which is customary in Britain to do that. And I went to the florist And I heard our friend's voice say roses. I thought I heard roses, but anyway, roses. So I was looking at the roses and there were some beautiful ones. Yellow rose. Okay. So I'm honing into the yellow roses. And I almost went for some really bright yellow, deep yellow roses. And I heard, no, 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 pale yellow, pale yellow. So I went to the pale yellow roses. And then he said, one rose. I went, this is embarrassing. I don't mind showing up with a bouquet of roses or even all yellow roses. One rose. Anyway, he
Pale.
was so pale. Yeah, one. He was so adamant. So anyway, I went home. My husband looked at me and went, "Really?" So I said, "That's what we've been said. As I'm told." So we went to the funeral, and as we walked in, I was guided to give the pale yellow rose to our friend's widow, who was waiting to greet the mourners. And she looked at me, she looked at the rose and didn't say anything. And we then went into the funeral. Afterwards, she came to us and told us this story. When they were together for many, many years, every Friday night, he bought her a bouquet of roses, 12 red roses and one pale yellow rose. And since he passed over, she was telling us, she felt she couldn't feel him. She couldn't feel him. She didn't know whether he was still with her or whatever. So the one pale yellow rose showed her that yes, he was.
That is a beauty. That that is a beauty. Um, these days, I've gotten more open to these voices that come in, and I feel like I've got headphones on the way you were having headphones on, but no rose, no pale yellow, all the information you're getting is like you've been talked to through these
Very much.
headphones. That,
Yeah.
pardon?
And it was his voice. I mean, it was absolutely unmistakably his voice.
And his voice. So it's kind of like these virtual head. I don't know. That's the way I think about it. And I sometimes have to say, okay, what do I do next? And or what shouldn't I do? And it's like the more you give it up, the more these voices give up your own volitionalness. You
I
can
wouldn't. Yeah, I would. Oh, this is so important. I choose this. I don't give up my volition. I choose this. And I don't hear those voices all the time. It's not like this is continuous back and fro in my head. But it means is that I've got the ability, and we all have, to turn the volume up or turn the volume down. And when it's appropriate, it's appropriate. I'm in continuous conversation, just as we're in continuous conversation. But I can say, Bernie, I'm just going to make a cup of tea. I'll see you in a
cup of
bit.
tea, cup of
A
tea,
cup of tea. I'll see you in a
cup of
bit. I'll see you in a
tea.
bit. And I think
Yeah.
it's really important to
Yeah,
understand that we're
and
not
I'm
giving
I'm
up our
glad I'm
volition.
glad you make that distinction because it only happens when I say, "What should I do next?" Because that's inviting the thing to come in because I'm operating here with my own volitional, and it's a wonderful example of what I think is so important that we're talking about is to be unique and have your own sense of agency
Yeah,
because we have the, I like this. No, we have free will. We don't have any choice. Um, to have free will, we got it. It depends on how we use it and when we use it.
yeah,
Uh, that we can choose to more and more be open when we are deciding to be open to
exactly.
having those instructions, and that's so important. We're part of it, and we're all by ourselves. So in the time that we have left, one of the reasons I watched the movie you sent me, and I've talked with Federico Fagin also on this podcast, and I've heard this from Bernard Carr as well. Uh, and the three of you got this thing about the universe wanting to know itself. Um, and that confuses me and intrigues me because what I'm looking at is the collective human organism, the collective
Mm,
human mind, and the collective human self-observer. I'm trying
Mm,
to help develop the collective human
yeah.
self-observer with this next book I'm writing about. So a couple of dimensions higher is is the universe trying to get to know itself. So it feeds back on what I'm trying to do with the collective human mind. So what's Bernard Carr says, I say, how do you know the universe is trying to get to know itself? He says, because that's what we do. We try to get to know our individual selves. And it sounds much like we're breathing with the universe in the way you were
Mm.
talking about it. But tell us about what you mean the universe wants to get to know itself.
Yeah, I mean, I think Federico and Bernard are doing a great. I know them both and really value them both. I would maybe use slightly different terms, but in general terms, I would wholeheartedly agree. I mean, our universe began meaningfully and purposefully able to evolve within itself from simplicity to complexity. It didn't just come into being to exist, it came into being to evolve. The laws of physics, the innate relationship within and the exquisite fine tuning within the laws of physics enabled it to do that. So at every point in that evolutionary journey, there's been greater complexity, individuated complexity, that by the time our planetary home came into being, and I would say now, the more we look out into our galaxy, we see more planets than stars on our galaxy alone. We see vast clouds of interstellar molecular gas, which actually we now again have discovered spectroscopically embeds organic molecules. So even before planetary systems come into being, the universe has evolved the potential for biological organisms to then be birthed and thrive on planets. The harbingers, the basic building blocks of DNA and RNA and amino acids and lipids and sugars are already there with vast amounts of ice in those clouds. That then, when sections of clouds collapse, they collapse not chaotically, but in ordered ways into planetary disks and then onwards into planetary systems. And some planets like ours able to be in the habitable zone, the Goldilocks zone, not too hot, not too cold, and as water planets to be able to nurture further complexity into single cells and multi-celled creatures and ecosystems, but as part of an overall planetary sentience. So for me, and I think for Bird and Frederico, that story, the story of our universe, is our story, but it's also the story of a universe that is continuing to learn about itself through its potential for emergence, its potential for evolution, its potential for individuated self-expression within its wholeness. That's what I mean. And um, somebody once asked me, why do universes exist? And I say something that I don't mean to be facetious, but God got curious. God got curious. And the universal teachings say that, the I Ching, for example, says in the beginning is the one, but the one then differentiates into two, the two into three, and from the three, 10,000 things are born. So in each of those, that initial differentiation, and then the abundance of the 10,000 things, for me, that's our universe continuing to learn about itself and explore its evolutionary potential. What can it evolve to be throughout its entire life cycle?
Related to what you just said, as I was listening to you representing the universe's purpose to itself, to like reminds me of my younger son just pushing buttons to see what happens. Uh, it's like, okay, let me try this one out and let's see what happens. That's what it seems like to me. There's a kind of playful intention here.
Yes, it's playful and yet it's incredibly purposeful. Because if you look right from the get-go, the relationships within the forces of our universe are such that that potential to complexify was already there from the very beginning. And so every step of the way, and it is a miraculous, and yet it is a wondrous journey, has been able to, in a way, predispose the next leap, the next leap, the next leap, and the right first time. I mean, for example, the DNA and RNA, the DNA in our bodies is the same DNA. The genes are different, but the DNA molecule per se is the same throughout the entirety of all biological organisms on Gaia. And because we can trace the beginnings of DNA to molecular clouds before planetary systems, I strongly suggest and suspect that we're going to find that DNA is the main biological building block throughout our galaxy and probably throughout our universe. And it's right first time, because when we look at the DNA molecule, there's been modelings of it, and it's like 1 in a million. It's so much more effective in terms of holding memory and being able to embody complex templates of evolution than any other alternative to its structure. So our universe has done this time and time and time again on that entire journey. So this incredibly inherent purpose, natural purpose within that's played out through ever greater levels of individuated complexity.
I mentioned the word intentional here, as you
Yeah.
use purpose, um, and purpose is a little more solidified. Intention is a little bit more ongoing, at least the way I think about them.
I like that. I like that. Yeah, I like that. I would say purposeful in the sense that it's got a very clear arc of complexity. But I think there is also, you mentioned playfulness. There
Yeah.
is that sense of playfulness. I asked the universe once, I said, because I was researching metamorphosis. And metamorphosis is extraordinary. I mean, it's not just when a caterpillar transforms, completely into a butterfly. An eel transforms, metamorphosizes 3 times in a life cycle. And I asked the universe, I said, why do you do this? And the answer came, because I can.
Okay. Finally, it took me a long time to get to you. You also speaking with the universe, and that is, well, I don't have a word for it, but there you being differentiated and also part of the whole at the same time when you are talking with the universe. Um, would you please tell us about that experience?
Yeah, although I have to say, it's one of those things where I can ask the question and get a response and have that sense that that is the level and the scale and the wisdom of the response. But it's more difficult to articulate the nature of the experience because for me it feels so natural. It's
It's
rather
so
like,
na
it's so
so
natural. Yeah.
and when okay, let's say that it's it's one thing to be communicating with the universe and the universe saying, "I do it. Because I can do it," which is why people rob banks and steal money. The same reason
Yeah.
for people who become excessively wealthy, they become and gain more power. They do it because they can do it. So it's a thing that can happen. But
Sure.
what I'm mostly interested in is your understanding of the universe being aware of itself.
Yeah. Yes.
That's a different level of consciousness than a universe having a purpose. Um, that you can see, like a car has a purpose to drive. There's
Sure.
there's a mind watching itself drive. There's watching itself, and
Mm,
that observer of itself is what
mm,
I'm most fascinated with.
mm. And that may be the discussion, another discussion for us, but that is my sense that our universe is indeed aware of itself in its entirety. I would also say that for me, it's not just a living universe, it's a loving universe. And I define loving in this sense, not as necessarily, but human expression and human experience of love, but also innately, innately relational. One of the things that indigenous wisdom teachings talk a lot about, teachers, is about right relationship, a relationship of mutuality, a relationship of support, a relationship of compassion. I would say that in a way, going back to our universe, experiencing through us and experiencing through other individuated beings is our journey towards compassion, our journey to a remembering of love at all different levels within ourselves, between each other, our love for our planetary home, our love of our planetary home for us, the love of our entire universe, for all the beings it brings into existence. And I'm not saying that all those beings behave in that loving way or right relationship way. Clearly, we haven't many in many ways. But maybe, and for me certainly, the invitation of the universe now is to wake up to remember we're inseparable, and therefore to wake up to realize that we're part of its vast communities of life. We're part of its vast families and communities of life. And by life, I mean beyond biological life. All the levels, the multiplicities, the differentiations, the richness, the abundance of its glorious existence and evolutionary potential. And for me, that is a loving universe.
And for me, that's a wonderful place for us to end our discussion today. Um, and yes, sometime I would like to talk with you about love because it's a misunderstood idea. It tends to be romantic love that gets too much emphasis. There's so much else that is love and that you are in contact with. And I didn't realize this, Jude, until today, talking with you, just how in touch with you are personally, with your heart and mind to the vastness and interconnectedness and the specialness of each one part of it at the same time, also being aware of the whole thing. And you represent that, writing about it, but you also represent it in the personhood of yourself, starting when you were age 4 or perhaps before, at least that's when you knew about it. So I very much appreciate this second time that you and I have talked like this because now I have a much deeper understanding, appreciation, and experience of you, as a representative, a person, a uniqueness, and connecting all of us to the all that we are all and each part of. Oh, thanks.
Thank you, Bernie. Thank and bless you always.
Thank you.